So this is a case of where how you go about handling an item in negotiations can make all the difference. There is a property that some clients of mine recently got under contract, so we're on the buy side. And because of the price point, the location, the property itself, my clients were very aware that they had to go aggressive in their offer. And even with me describing the risks and everything involved, my clients actually decided to go under contract without an option period. They waived their option period so that they could basically get the deal. And there are very much there are inherent risks involved there, which of course I discussed with them. But decided very strongly that this is the house for them and they wanted it no matter what. And after going under contract, of course, they got an inspection done. And pretty much everything on the inspection report was expected, except for one thing. It was found out that there were severe deficiencies in the panel itself and that the house still had aluminum wiring throughout. Now, there are a few ways to handle this situation. The most common way is to go to the seller and say, or the seller's agent and say, hey, this was not disclosed to us that there was aluminum wiring in this house. We want this addressed. And immediately what that's going to do is put the sellers on the defensive, and their expectations are going to be thrown off because their expectations are like, this is a number that we agreed on. You waive the option period. This is the number we're closing on. And anytime one party's expectations get doused, it really sets things up for failure as it pertains to completing the transaction successfully. And being an experienced realtor, I'm well aware of this. So rather than kind of go in with guns blazing and saying, hey, you didn't disclose this, this is a problem, we need to address this, we took a completely different tact. And this is something that my clients were on board with, this is something we discussed, and this is what we decided to do. So rather than take the sort of strong-armed approach, regardless of how much they felt that that was appropriate or reasonable, we decided to take a much more passive and a much more amenable tact, which went something like this. Listen, we're pretty sure you didn't know about the aluminum wiring, which in all actuality, I don't think they did. The sellers did. But this is a big issue. It's an expensive issue. We had a quote for, in the 5 figures to get this remediated. So all we're asking is if you feel it appropriate, if you could help us as the buyers out, then we would be super grateful for it. And that's it. And this is something I went over with the listing agent to make sure that they weren't misreading us, that nothing got lost in translation, which is very key, is to make sure you're on the same page with the listing agent on the tone and really the expectations now on the buyer side. And I actually recorded a video with my clients and sent it to them and explained everything in the email, just so they didn't feel like we were trying to strong arm them. They didn't feel like we were trying to pull one over on them. We're trying to purposely find something in the inspection report to, get some free money, which, buyers and buyers agents, sometimes do. That happens, especially when you get into bidding wars, right? They go in, they do everything they can to win it, and then they try and pull it back down. And that wasn't the case. So we worked very hard to explain that to the sellers to make sure we were on the same page. And at the end of the day, even though we were without an option period, no HOA, we're past the lending contingencies. And again, every step of the way, I'm notifying my buyers of, hey, if you're waiving this contingency, these are the risks involved. This deadline for this contingency is coming up. We're going over all these things throughout. So I've got very informed buyers who knew what they were getting into. And at this stage of the transaction, they knew that the likelihood was very high that the seller would say, hey, it is what it is. This is what we agreed to. And they were fine with that. But thankfully, this paid off. The seller decided to split the costs of rewiring the house 50-50 with the buyer. And I feel strongly that this wouldn't have happened if we would have tried a strong arm approach. This was a situation where there was a whole lot of other buyers. And from what I understand, there were multiple buyers above our price point right? They decided to go with my buyers because of what they felt were very strong, very motivated buyers. So the seller could have easily gone to one of those other buyers and say, hey, we're thinking of cutting ties with this buyer. How are you guys looking? Are you still interested? And I feel strongly that they probably would have found another buyer if things would have went sideways. And we are very thankful and grateful that it worked out. But I think this is just a good example of how taking something a little bit differently, approaching something a little bit differently, being a little bit more kinder in the negotiation can yield not only the desire that the result that you desire, but also something that's a win-win, agreeable for all parties involved. So sometimes just take a little bit different approach, a little softer, a little kinder approach, and it'll yield dividends.